Yeah, so I think there's two ways to think about it. There's the larger theoretical PhD and AI type conversations around this that I have with my AI PhD friends. So it's trying to get computers in general. I think there's probably there's a good definition around trying to get computers to reason like a human. That's a pretty good definition. And usually that means being able to take in information and make a decision. Those are some really kind of good guidelines. Um, that's usually, I think, what the really smart AI technical people kind of think about it long term. Um, and then you have this sci-fi version of AI that generally clouds everyone's mind because we've all seen this fun science fiction in the distant future around AI, and it's kind of like the general public um, thinks that everything that's human-like is AI, and I is defined as AI, and I probably would not necessarily agree with that. In the technical fields, AI is some very specific algorithms around trying to get computers to kind of reason. And in the science fiction world, it's just anything that kind of looks like it could be humanish. So a chatbot, for example, in my mind, sometimes it could use AI algorithms to try to be more human, and sometimes it's not using any of those sorts of technologies. And I would say maybe in those cases it wasn't AI. So I think there's kind of that category. If I'm getting down to brass tacks, like applied AI, like is more what I do. I'm more on the business side now, although I do some code and some technology still. Um, I say pattern recognition and prediction. So when I talk to business people and executives and product managers and people that have to take this set of technology and they have to turn it into something useful, create useful use cases out of it. I usually talk about the pattern recognition prediction is kind of currently where we are, and that's going to get better, in the future, and then it'll become, sentient and smarter and all that many, 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 many years away. But currently, where we are, if you're thinking about building something over the next decade or even 2 decades, pattern recognition and prediction is where to start. So you've got any sort of machine. Yeah. So I would put that in kind of the category of AI from the business perspective. You're looking for all sorts of ways to gather pattern recognition. And then prediction is another really useful giant set of use cases. And prediction is often just pattern recognition over time. So they're very, very similar. But usually I break those two categories out to help people think about it from a business perspective.
Awesome. And there's a lot of confusion between what is AI and what is machine learning. So can you provide some distinction between AI and machine learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. To me, AI is the bigger, broad term. So for just all of these sort of um, all the algorithms kind of feed into AI, and then machine learning, I would say, is a category within AI. And you can think about so if you think about neural nets or those kind of things, it's a very specific technique where you're trying to model. Deep learning is the hot kind of machine learning based on neural nets technique lately, and that's even another subset within AI. And yeah, I would say there's categories within to me at least, and I've heard it defined different ways. To me, AI is the term I use for the largest umbrella. Um,
Perfect. Mhm.
and then we can talk about specific categories of sort of um, um, techniques and algorithms within that. So the one of the interesting ones is, for example, where you're trying to mirror the brain. It's a very, very rough or loose interpretation of the brain is when they talk about um, you know neural nets and deep learning. And Yeah, that's kind of where you're doing these. You're basically creating. Um, you have your inputs and your outputs, and you're doing training on a system. If you have multiple layers, then you're deep, and then you train it and retrain it, back propagation, et cetera, to create these models where you're able to do sort of fuzzy logic, input versus output. And that's sort of that's the goal of kind of a lot of these different techniques, and a lot of them are different for different purposes. But it gets back down to kind of pattern recognition and prediction, like I mentioned before. From a business perspective, I would say pattern recognition and prediction is what I would start with. I would start with sort of the use case, and then I would work backwards from that to figure out what techniques you need to use. Some of them might not even fall within what a technical person would define as AI, but I would still think about using whatever technique is needed to solve the use case. Um, yeah, so we can go a little bit deeper into that later as well.
Perfect. Now that's very helpful. So, what does your new AI company do?
So yeah, so Cognified with a Y. Basically, what we're doing is we're starting with, and this is a technique I can. We're starting with a very basic proofreader, and it's integrated with Gmail, LinkedIn, Twitter, those kind of things. And what you do is, if you're working at a company, you type in the tweet that you think you want to send, or the email that you think you want to send, and you click a button and it proofreads it based on effectiveness and settings from that particular company that you work for, and gives you feedback on how to be more effective in your communication. So it's really starting with, it's taking kind of grammar and spelling to the next level, and then customizing it for business effectiveness. And it's sort of in the natural language processing category of, we have AI, and natural language processing is another category of things you want to work on, where you're just talking about language. So that's kind of what we are right now. And we've got over 300 customers right now that are kind of individual customers, mostly in marketing and PR. And they run their, so for example, they're writing a marketing email. They'll run it through our proofreading software and get feedback on how to make that email more effective. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. And can you talk more about BotChain, I think, which was another company, right?
Yeah, BotChain, we launched that in March. It's still an ongoing concern. We basically created a subsidiary out of Tala, the last startup I worked at. So it's sort of as if I did Tala, and then we created a subsidiary, and I worked on that, and designed, hired, and then launched in March the foundations of BotChain. And then we brought in a bunch of about 10 partners that represent a lot of different bots. So BotChain is sort of it's a platform where you can do three main things with bots. And a bot we define very loosely. A bot could be like a chat bot, but a bot could also be an automated process, an independent automated process that's making a decision. So RPA, robotic process automation, falls into that category as well. So what we do is we allow you as the platform itself has three main categories of things. One is identification. So we allow everybody to register their bot or their bot process on the bot chain to have an immutable permanent address. And that's used for validation of identification. So if one bot in the future, the way that we theorize this and how this would look in 10 years is that, you've got a personal assistant chat bot, and you say, go move money from this bank account to that bank account, or, go buy something. My wife has an anniversary coming up. Let's buy her flowers. It can go out and search this registry of bots to go chat with, to make the transaction, to complete the transaction. And if it's talking to your bank, or if it's talking to the flower shop, you want to be able to have a handshake of identification to know that, so that either you're talking to a computer or your computer is talking to someone else's computer. Both of those cases, you need identification so that they can shake hands, and each of them know that they're talking to the entity that they think they're talking to, which is important. So we built that first. The second layer that we built on top of that is permanently storing the transaction that occurred. So in the future, I think bots, AIs will talk to each other more than they talk to humans. So you'll have bots and AIs running around doing negotiations with each other, finalizing some sort of negotiation and moving on in a sub-second time frame. So what we wanted to do was be able to keep a permanent record of what's happening at all of these intersections of bots, and within your company and outside your company, et cetera. So we created a way to create basically a hash and a timestamp that gets put on the bot chain, that you can go back and do an audit on, what happened and why a decision was made, for future reference. It could be for future government reference, could be for tax reasons, it could be for something went haywire with the bot and we want to try to back into what happened. So, the second part of what botchain does is create permanent records of what's going on with the bot ecosystem. And then the third category of things we built and we're actually putting out to the community is building a marketplace for bot skills and other types of things that bots can share amongst themselves. So, for example, if a company, for example, our first customers are all bot companies. So we may have a partner that has 50,000 bots that they've created and they support for all these different companies. They can register all those bots for all the identity stuff. They can use the storage. They can use the, storing the transactions. And let's say they're in a certain industry and they have some sort of knowledge around answering questions, or there's probably a lot of things in this marketplace that I haven't come up with yet, but it may be, so I have a bunch of knowledge that all the bots can use. It may be related to geography or something. It's like, hey, why don't we all use a standard way to talk about geography amongst all the bots in the world? They can put it there and share it, and the bots can consume that. So that's the third part, is like, how do you plug additional capabilities into this ecosystem? Some that we've thought of and some that we probably haven't thought of yet. So those are the three things that botchain does. Launched it in March and it's out there and active and all that. So that was my last project before this company.